that if you're, for instance, on lithium medication, does that mean you can't drink your tap water? Because the therapeutic dose is very close to the toxic dose. So we're going to have to supply special water to them. What do you do for small children? What do you do for babies? What do you do for pregnant women? They can't drink the water supply because it's going to have a very profound effect on the small baby's brain. And none of this is being considered. Well, then other people are already stepping forward. Well, not only should we add lithium to the water supply to prevent suicide and depression, we should add other drugs to the water. There's a British physician who said we ought to add statin drugs and antihypertensives to all water. Well, then there's other psychiatrists and people interested in human behavior who say, well, there's other drugs we could alter human behavior with. Well, I don't think we need elitist scientists or technocrats, as you say, altering our thinking by putting things in our water supply. That's the drugging of America on a mass scale for these elitists to manipulate our minds. And they have no idea what it is. I mean, look at the fluoride program, for instance. Here it started out, it's very safe, it's very benign. Now, 60 years later, we find out, well, no, it's increased cancer rates 10%. It makes tumors grow faster. It increases bone fractures. It produces reproductive problems. What's one of the major things that's just exploded since I've been in medical school is infertility in young people. Fertility clinics are everywhere. Young people are having trouble conceiving. And no one has a scientific explanation other than these things that are being added to water and food, etc., that are known to affect human reproduction. This is another one of those living constitution rights where the left says, well, it's not in the Constitution. It was not proposed by the framers of the Constitution. It was not part of the contract between the state and the federal government, but we've inserted it on our own without any vote, without any constitutional methods of adding an amendment. We just decided it would be good for society to do this, and therefore we'll do it. And if later we find out we've created a tragedy, then, well, that's just the price of that you have to pay. It reminds me of when Malcolm Muggeridge was traveling to the Ukraine during the great Ukrainian starvation imposed by Stalin. He was riding on the train with a reporter from the New York Times, and the dead bodies were just piled up like cordwood everywhere. And Malcolm Muggeridge was just shocked. He said, I can't believe what Stalin is doing. And he turned to the New York Times reporter, Walter Durante, and he said, aren't you shocked by this? And he says, oh, well, you have to break some eggs to make an omelet. We're building a new society. Well, this is their idea. This is their same viewpoint. Is that, oh, yes, we may harm a lot of people. We may kill some babies. We may create some new diseases. We may wipe out whole populations at a time. But that's the price we have to pay to create the new vision, the new society. And these people admit it in many of their writings. If you take the time to read these things. For instance, one of the great ophthalmologists, I've forgotten his name now, I think it was Wise, but he was an ophthalmologist back in the 1950s. And one of the greatest. They still give an award in his name. And he wanted to euthanize anybody who was blind. It always starts with the worst case scenario. And he said, well, it's terrible that people are born blind. Therefore, what we'll do is we'll sterilize all families that had blind children so they can't have any more blind children. Well, then other ophthalmologists came forward and said, well, 99% of blindness has nothing to do with heredity. He was going to sterilize all blind people, so none of them could have children. Well, then he carried it even further. He said, well, anyone with impaired vision should be sterilized. And then it became anyone who wears glasses should be sterilized. So we always see this progression. It starts out with a worst case scenario to sell it to the public because the public feelings of sympathy and empathy are easily engendered when you pull this little child that has this horrible disease. And you say, we need to do this so that this doesn't ever happen. And then you approve that, and then the next thing you know, we're killing people who are just have minor problems. I call it the Kevorkian progression. If you remember Kevorkian in the beginning, it's people who have terminal diseases. They're going to die soon. Why let them suffer? Well, most people said, well, that makes sense. I don't think people should suffer. Then, they're not going to die anytime soon, but they have a disease that's crippling, and it's not nice to have to live like that, so he killed them. Well, then people started saying, well, I don't know if I agree with that. They can live with that condition. They just not be able to do everything they'd like to. Well, where did it end up? Then he was killing a woman because she was depressed. So there's always this progression. It starts out with the worst case scenario to sell it because of its power of empathy. And then once it's sold and becomes legislation and a law, then we start including large numbers of people who are nowhere near that severe. Well, this is what happened in eugenics. In eugenics, they were going to round up anyone who didn't have full capability to have a Harvard education. They wanted to build compounds to put them in. If you had just moderately low IQ, they wanted to forcibly sterilize, and they did. They forcibly sterilized some 36,000 people in America before it was finally ended. And as I said, the major proponents of this eugenics idea back in the 1920s and early 30s were traveling to Germany, meeting with eugenicists over there, telling them about what we were doing in America in the early ages, in the 1910s and 1920s. And this is where Hitler created his eugenics program. Hitler was, exchanging eugenicist ideas with people from the Rockefeller Foundation. Stoddard was one of these people. He wrote a book about it, in which he was exchanging these eugenics ideas from the Rockefeller Foundation with Hitler. And Hitler built this huge program of forced sterilization of people he felt like shouldn't reproduce. That's what stopped the eugenics movement in America, and the Rockefeller people, according to Dr. Lilly, and she had access to the Rockefeller records by permission of the family. According to that, he ended that program and told them, don't use the name eugenics anymore. We're going to use the name social engineering so that people won't know what we're doing, that we're continuing this program under a different name. But it all started out in 1910 with the idea of science of man, of recreating man. Scientific discovery took place as we learned more about cells, we learned about DNA, we learned about inheritance patterns, how genes worked, how you could turn them on and off, as our pharmacology became more sophisticated. All of this increased our ability technologically to carry out some of these things. Now you have to realize most of molecular biology is beneficial. I'm not opposed to molecular biology. The vast majority of it is extremely beneficial. But that gives you a huge cover because you can't attack molecular biology. So, well, what about the things we learned to stop diabetes? What about the things we're doing now with heart disease and cancer? It all came because of molecular biology. Well, I admit that, and I'm for that. I think we should continue molecular biology. What we should divorce from it is an elitist idea that government, in conjunction and using this technological ability, can force behavioral changes in people against their will. To use this technology to change your ability to have independent thought. There's a neuroscientist by the name of Delgado, who was one of the leading experts in the world of deep brain stimulation. He suddenly disappeared from the scene, stopped publishing papers, stopped writing books, didn't attend conferences any longer. And I think it was Discover magazine traced him down and found him and asked him, what are you doing now? And he said, well, I work for the federal government on a secret project. And he said, well, what are you doing? And he said, well, I can't tell you a lot of details, but I don't have to use electrodes anymore to change human thought. I can do it at a distance with my directed microwave. And I can aim it at certain parts of your brain and fill you with fear or make you hear voices or see things. And he said, that's all I can tell you. But I get unlimited money, the best laboratory in the world, and all I want to do this research. Well, he wrote a book before he did this,